Today I'll be talking about the paradox between closeness and distance. These feel like opposites, but really they're two sides of the same coin. We don't have closeness and connection without some sort of distance or freedom, and we also don't have distance or freedom without first some sort of closeness and connection. If we haven't met before, I'm Shaneé with Evolve Relational Therapy. I help clients with relationships, including this sort of paradox, so if you need help, please reach out. My idea behind this paradox comes from my work using emotionally focused therapy, my knowledge of clients and where they tend to get stuck and what tends to be most difficult in relationships, and attachment theory. Attachment theory basically says that as a social species, we need other humans in order to survive. We all need care. It's not a want, it's a need. We need connection, we need care. And when we don't have that, we are hardwired to seek that out. If you think of a baby or a very young child, if their first few attempts to get attention or to get a need met go unnoticed, they tend to escalate behavior. They might start screaming really loudly, throwing their arms. Eventually, they might shut down and go into this sort of self-preservation type of mode, but you can see that when the initial attempts don't work, it tends to escalate. Or if there's already an established pattern, the child might go more quickly into that sort of escalated behavior. When we apply this to adult relationships start to make a lot more sense. We have people who need connection and need that sort of support from a partner, but when they reach out, either their partner doesn't hear them, doesn't respond, and they may escalate behavior, or they reach out in a way that's a little bit more destructive because they learned that in order to get care, they need to kind of step things up, they need to come in at a more intense level, or that it's unsafe to ask for care. Maybe the other person tends to respond in a negative way, or if they've learned that somehow over the course of time, and that makes it really difficult in relationships because we want that sort of care. We need that sort of care. And when it's not there, what do? Relationships break down. Those are those moments of crisis that clients come in for when they're in relationships and they say, this one time I really needed my partner to show up and they weren't there for me, and that really hurts. Those are the things that we really need to pay attention to. So that's where this idea comes from. So let's consider the types of behaviors that would typically be a closeness-seeking behavior, and those that would be more of a distance-seeking behavior. So before we go into this list, I want you to know that yes, some of these are more preferable to others, and it's not about whether or not you should or shouldn't do these things. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm just giving you the ideas as far as the classification goes. So that way in your relationship, you might be able to consider, what's actually happening. Is my partner really reaching for me and it's happening in a way that is really hard for me to listen to? Or is my partner actually trying to say that they're overwhelmed and they need a little bit more space to be able to feel safe and come back to that place of connection? Closeness-seeking behaviors include, of course, asking openly for closeness and connection or support, talking about your feelings of disconnection, aloneness, or pain, complaining about unmet closeness needs, criticizing your partner or the way that they're really responding to your calls for closeness and connection, acts of jealousy, going through somebody's phone, asking them a million questions, maybe even throwing some form of fit or tantrum, just feels completely out of control at that point. Distance-seeking behaviors include asking for distance or space, setting up a timeout, talking about your feelings of being overwhelmed or overstimulated, complaining about unmet distance needs, criticizing the way your partner responds to your call for distance or space, acts of intimidation, things like yelling, slamming your hand down on the counter, anything that might be threatening where the other person would respond by giving you space. storming out, stonewalling. After thinking about these different lists of behaviors, you might be thinking, well, why can't we all just use the more productive items on this list to reach out and have our needs be met? And the answer is because that is incredibly difficult and sometimes painful. This is especially true if in the past we've grown up in a family where maybe our needs were ignored, maybe the care was inconsistent, or there was some form of abuse. We learn to not trust that when we reach out, somebody else can respond to us in the way that we need. And maybe we've learned this in past relationships. We can have these models of ourselves as unloving, unworthy, and we can have models of others as dangerous and not able to respond. Those are things that we can struggle with for a very long time until we have a new experience with our current partner or the current person that we're with, so long as we're in a safe relationship. The more preferable behaviors on this list leave us the most vulnerable to our partner's response. Let's go back to this idea of the paradox between closeness and distance. People are naturally drawn towards this place of equilibrium, this place of homeostasis, where there is an appropriate level of closeness and distance. And although these two things may be in flux, they may change a little bit, they tend to stay between, these same levels. Like, this is where it feels comfortable for a couple. And when something happens where one person either has to distance or somebody's become overly close, these things are pulled out of where their normal range and functioning would be. And so the system naturally is going to try to correct itself. That's going to look like the person who is needing connection, they're going to really call for the connection from the other person in any way that they can. And the other person who is distancing is really going to push away. They're going to say, I've had too much closeness, I need a break, I'm overwhelmed, and they're going to push away in whatever way that they can, until the system is able to come back into balance where they feel comfortable and they're able to continue forward. Let's say that your partner's going out of town, something came up, they have a business trip that they're going to take. Whenever you hear this news, your instant gut reaction is, oh no, like the significant person in my life is leaving. I'm a little bit worried about that. And you express that to them. You say, hey, I'm really worried with you leaving because I've got all of this other stuff going on, and I'm worried I won't feel connected to you while you're gone, or I'll miss you while you're gone. And your partner responds to say something like, I understand, I'm going to miss you also, and I'm going to call you every evening to make sure that we're able to connect. If you're able to hear your partner's response and you take that as they're meeting my needs, they are demonstrating that they want to be there and support me and connect with me, then you're able to experience that distance as a smooth transition. So you have the closeness, then when the distance comes, it's manageable, it's tolerable, because you know that other person is there. Even when they're away, you know they're there and you can still find them. Let's consider that same scenario where your partner said they're going on a trip and your instant response is kind of, oh no, I'm scared, I'm gonna lose this connection. Except for, let's say now your experience is that if you open up to your partner, that would be really scary to do, to talk about your feelings. If you did that, your partner might even criticize you and say something like, you're really too emotional, or you're weak, something along those lines. And so what you end up doing is saying, okay, go on that trip. You use one of those other unpreferable ways of seeking connection. You become a little bit combative maybe. Or you might start to criticize their behavior. You might say, well, it was fine last week when you went on the trip, so I don't see why that's a problem now. You always do this to me. Or you're never there for me, so go on ahead. And you can see underneath all of these examples the pain, the hurt, the lack of connection. And when we express ourselves in that way, it's really hard for our partner to see that, to respond in a way that says, I'm here for you, I want to support you, I don't want to lose our connection while we're away, because they start to feel that over closeness like creeping in, and they push for distance. Like, I don't know what's going on here. This is too overwhelming. I need distance. And so they might go on that trip without saying goodbye. They might storm off from that conversation and just leave, and then you're feeling even more hurt and alone. And this is where we get into these sort of reciprocal patterns that feed on themselves. Let's consider this also in a reverse format. So say that you do reach out to your partner and you say, hey, I'm worried about these things as you go on your trip. They might feel just that much was threatening, that maybe this reminds them of something in the past, or something that their parent might have done, or something that happened in a different relationship, and they become really afraid. And they start to push for the distance, and they say something like, you are overly emotional, or why does this have to be a problem right now? Why can't you just get over it? And when that happens and they push away, it almost draws the other person forward a little bit more. And that's when you see this other person tend to use more destructive behaviors. And this also becomes a pattern until the point where usually people go into too distant stances where they're not really talking or responding to each other because it's just too painful to be close. But that's at a point of crisis, which is neither here nor there. But you can see how when there's not a balance between closeness and distance, relationships really get in trouble. Historically, most of us would have lived in social groups. We would have had more people to kind of lean on when somebody was away or gone, that would have helped to support us through difficult times. But more and more we've become isolated. And so our significant others tend to be our primary support. And so when things happen with them, it can be incredibly painful. And those are the things that clients come to therapy for. Those moments where it was very necessary that you responded and you didn't, you weren't there for me, and I can't let that go, that time that you weren't there for me. And now every time something happens, it reminds me of that pain. It feels just like that. Emotionally focused therapy can be really helpful for this. It's what I use with a lot of my clients. It can help you have new experiences in therapy that lead to a place of connection and safety, where you're able to reach and respond to each other in a more productive way, and understanding those sort of old reciprocal negative patterns that keep you stuck, or past hurts that keep you stuck. So if you need help, please reach out. I hope this video was helpful for you and was able to spark a few ideas as far as what happens between this balance of closeness and distance, and why they really are a paradox. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye. If the other person doesn't respond, it can kind of explode. The client. The client can throw a tantrum. Okay. I experience working with clients where they typically get stuck in what goes wrong in relationships. And once somebody has felt cared for, oftentimes, then they're able to give more space. As humans, as a social species,